This is the Rational Reminder Podcast, a weekly reality check on sensible investing and financial decision-making for Canadians. We are hosted by me, Benjamin Felix, and Cameron Passmore. So episode 59 today, we had a fantastic guest talking about something that most people don't talk about or even think about, which is annuities, or in more general terms, pensionization, guaranteeing a stream of income to insure against longevity risk. It's fascinating stuff.
So it's someone that we had speak at an event a number of years ago. Her name is Alexandra Macqueen, and she's a financial author, editor, educator, consultant, speaker. She has her CFP. She's based in Toronto, and she teaches at York University. And the book that I love that I've given out a lot is called Pensionize Your Nest Egg, How to Use Product Allocation to Create a Guaranteed Income for Life. And this is a book that she co-wrote with Dr. Moshe Milevsky.
Yeah, who's very well known in the academic space of researching how annuities fit into retirement income and generating income streams in general.
I thought the interview was brilliant. Her background and her credentials and the way she thinks about the math and making decisions, she was extremely rational. I loved her line talking about like the folklore and rules of thumb that the financial planning industry uses that so often is not founded in rational mathematical decision making.
But she's also balanced between understanding that, yes, the rational economic component is important, but that's not the only reason that you're going to make these types of decisions. So I think it was good to have that balance.
Have a listen. Yeah, so welcome to the podcast, Alexander. We're so pleased to have you with us.
Thank you.
I know you spoke to an advisor event we had a number of years ago, and it was a great presentation, and I know it had an impact on us, so we're thrilled to have you join us.
Thanks very much.
So we have a ton to cover, and I think this is going to be, our audience is generally on the more technical side, I think, because we talk about pretty technical stuff, and they seem to like it. But today we're kind of talking about something that people aren't as familiar with, which is annuities. Pensionization in general, but that means for most people without a pension, annuities. So to kind of set the stage, I think that I want to start with some questions just to get some definitions out so that people will know what we're talking about, because this is a bit of a unique space. So the first question I want to ask is, can you sort of introduce the distinction between financial economics and financial planning?
Right. It's a great question. So think about financial economics is a branch of finance which looks at the efficient allocation of resources under conditions of uncertainty. And you think, oh, that sounds exactly like financial planning. But it is an academic discipline, and in Canada, at any rate, the discipline of financial planning hasn't really advanced to the level of an academic discipline. So financial planning is sort of governed by rules of thumb and almost folklore, versus financial economics, which is governed by lots of quantitative thinking, equations, lots of rational econs.
Interesting. So that leads me to another question, which is, when someone's making financial decisions, should they be exercising those decisions from the perspective of financial economics or financial planning?
Oh, it's another good question. I mean, of course, over the last decade, 2 decades, we've introduced the idea of behavioral economics, which is extremely relevant for annuities. But once you open the behavioral box, kind of everything can fly out. So should people be governed by the efficient allocation of resources under conditions of uncertainty? Yes. But we also have to take into account human behavior.
So fascinating. And certainly in our business, everybody wants to talk about asset allocation and how to build a better portfolio. And certainly this podcast talks a lot about that. And product allocation is often completely overlooked. Can you tell our listeners what product allocation is and how it relates to the idea of pensionization?
So when you're accumulating funds for retirement or for any goal, you're usually allocating, this is sort of your basic finance 101 theory, that you want to allocate your portfolio across a couple of different dimensions, so stocks and bonds. So this is our classic asset allocation, 2 different types of assets. When you hit retirement, there are other products that can come into play, which correspond to the different risks that are now new in the space. So when you're saving for retirement, you're not worried about how long those funds are going to last because you're continuing to add to them and you're not withdrawing from them. You hit retirement, all of a sudden longevity risk. So how long are these things going to last given the return expectations I've got, given the withdrawals I'm making? maybe I need to put some of my funds into products, which will cover off those specific risks. So product allocation is a phrase that my co-author, Dr. Moshe Milevsky, who teaches at the Schulich School of Business at York, came up with to describe this new realm of products or things that we can add to portfolios once we hit retirement to cover off those new risks.
Do you think people are allocating across products? Like from what you see in Canada in general, are people focusing more on asset allocation and ignoring product allocation?
So let's go back to our distinction between financial economics and financial planning. The classic distinction is the financial economics prof or the finance prof who says, but why don't people just buy annuities? They're so efficient, they're so cheap. Now, I'm not talking about complex tax-deferred annuities. In the US, annuity has almost a totally different meaning because it's a much more complex product, although we are starting to introduce new types of annuities in Canada, so we'll start to see some of that complexity. But the economist looks at how do I efficiently and cheaply cover off these new risks? So the risk of longevity, for example, I should buy a single premium income annuity. For the price, it's cheap, right? I've hedged this risk, I didn't spend very much to do it, and I've removed the uncertainty. So are people doing that? The evidence says no.
Interesting. Okay. So there's a definition that I got from your book that I think is important to continue this discussion, and it does encapsulate some of the things that you just talked about. Can you introduce our listeners to the Retirement Sustainability Quotient, or RSQ?
Right. So think about back to grade school math. So a quotient is just one thing divided by another, or a measure of something. So the idea of the Retirement Sustainability Quotient is a way to measure how sustainable an income source is over an expected lifetime. So if I have, for example, a spending need of $15,000 in retirement, but my CPP and OAS give me $15,000, my retirement income is 100% sustainable. Alternately, I could be a physician, for example, who's never taken salaries, always taken dividends. I've hit retirement. I have a large amount in my corporate savings account that I can start to withdraw. So I have a lot of money, but the sustainability of that income may be very low because very little of it is guaranteed.
Let's knock off another term from your book, which is the concept of financial legacy value, or FLV. Can you describe
there's
that?
Always a trade-off between the RSQ and the FLV. I'm going a little bit into the alphabet soup here. But if you want to increase the sustainability of your income, you will decrease your expected financial legacy. So if you think about the spectrum or an array, I have increased my RSQ at one side and I have increased my financial legacy at the side. And the other side, I want to pick someplace in between depending on my preferences.
But you suggest that this is not a decision that many people are making these days. They're not even thinking about the product side of this, are they?
I think that people are making it, but implicitly. I don't think that people are having explicit discussions about which do I want to maximize. So, I had a conversation with a client this morning about what does he want his financial legacy to look like? And he said, well, whatever's left over. I think that that's kind of a level of thinking that most people are doing.
And I guess we could think about this like the RSQ. I just want to go back and I'll give our listeners the actual equation. It's the percent of your total retirement income. It's the percent of pensionized income times the percent of non-pensionized income times 1 minus the probability of ruin. And the probability of ruin, I think, would be that would be like the Monte Carlo simulation result. Is that?
It's just the chance that you hit zero in your portfolio allocation. So think back to the guaranteed living benefit. So the variable annuities with a guaranteed living rider on them that were sold 2008, 2009, those things had basically a long-dated put option. You said your readers or your listeners like technical conversations. So that if the value of the portfolio hit zero, this rider would spring into effect and pay the amount that you'd purchase, so $5,000 a month or whatever it was.
So in that case, there's zero probability of ruin, right?
It's hedging. It's completely eliminating the probability of ruin from the portfolio. So then there was like a whole decade of discussion about what is the actual probability of ruin, but it isn't difficult to simulate a portfolio that actually goes to zero, right? If you have a highly leveraged portfolio, if you have a highly concentrated portfolio, if you make a large number of withdrawals relative to your total portfolio. So do you want to protect yourself against that risk? And this is a way to do so.
Yeah, right. Okay. Very
Could
interesting.
we go back to some of the basics? Describe exactly what an annuity is and how they work.
Right. At the most basic level. So these things have actually been around for a long time. And actually, Moshe just did an interview, an article recently where he talked about there was more innovation in the annuity space in the 17th century than there is today. So I can buy today what's called a single premium income annuity. So I give the insurance company a single premium. I give them $100,000. In exchange, I get an amount, maybe it's $500 a month for life, no matter how long that is. Now I can load that up with many different riders. So I can buy a rider that increases the amount per month. I can buy a survivor benefit if I have a spouse. I can buy different riders that will ensure that I get a minimum amount no matter how long. So if I die, a year after buying this thing, that my estate still gets payments for, say, 10 additional years. But at the most basic level, an annuity is me handing over my hard-earned cash to the life insurance company that then provides income for as long as I'm alive.
This is a tool, obviously, that can be used in generating retirement income. And we've talked about this concept of the RSQ, the retirement sustainability quotient, and the financial legacy value. Can annuities be used to optimize both of those things at the same time, or is there always going to be a trade-off?
Well, it's interesting to think about because intuitively you might think, oh, well, obviously this reduces the amount of legacy. But if you have pensionized a proportion of your income, you can then afford to take more risk with the remainder of the portfolio. So by definition, the expected return from the remainder of the portfolio is higher. So said another way, if I'm worried about running out of money, which if I have not annuitized, or if I have a portfolio with a low sustainability quotient, I'm always going to be worried about running out of money, unless I'm highly risk-loving in the area of longevity, right? I'm willing to eat cat food, or I'm going to tell my kids, that's it, you're on the hook. So I'm worried about running out of money. I have to keep the assets in a safer allocation than I would have otherwise, grinding down the expected return. So the argument is putting some, and what the right amount is for any individual will vary, but putting some of my assets into this pensionized form, I can then allocate the remainder of the portfolio to more risky assets, giving me potentially more than I would have received if I just kept stuff in safe assets to withdraw from it.
That's mind-blowing to think about. And we already made the distinction between asset allocation and product allocation. But from what we were just talking about there, it sounds like there's an interaction between product allocation and asset allocation. You can take more risk.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, to take that line of questioning one step further, would you consider annuities to be part of the fixed income allocation, or is it a totally separate animal that allows you to be more aggressive, but in a different way?
There are different schools of thought, and I'm not sure that there's like a settled point of view about whether the annuity is fixed income or whether it's something else. Practically speaking, it functions like fixed income. I do want to note, though, that in Canada, especially if you're buying an annuity either at an advanced age, I know we'll probably talk about this later, or with non-registered funds, it will give you a much higher yield than fixed income will, at a lower cost.
Do you think there's a type of person who is better suited for an annuity? And is there an ideal age to consider annuitizing part of your portfolio?
Well, the person who is suited for the annuity is the person who is not longevity risk tolerant. So they are worried about running out of money. And there's somebody who is not interested in opening envelopes from financial services companies every month to say, here's what your portfolio did. Certainly when I walked into the office yesterday morning, what people were talking about is what markets had done on the weekend. And, if you're 75, 85 years old, do you want to be worried about what Trump or some future Trump is saying in a tweet that affects markets all around the world? So that's the answer to question one, is people who don't want a lot of variability in their future income streams. And your second question was when to buy it. So as a general rule, the price of annuity income will go down as you age because your probability of survival is also decreasing. But a good strategy to think about is dollar cost averaging into an annuity. So maybe some at age 70, some at age 75, and maybe a final allocation at 85.
I know I've had a number of instances where we thought it made perfect sense and the client agreed, but when it came time to write the check and hand over the money, they just couldn't part with it. Have you had that experience also?
It is an absolutely, behaviorally, I mentioned behavioral finance before, behavioral economics. It's it's very challenging to deal with. I'm going to give this large check, which is certain, right? I'm the one who's writing my name and the amount on it for the life insurance company for an uncertain future income stream. Think about it. Most of the work I've been doing recently, or quite a bit of the work I've been doing recently, is in the area of commuted values of pensions. So people are walking out of pension plans. They've got maybe $800,000 or more. It's the largest single amount they've ever dealt with, larger than their house, and it's this one-time decision. It really takes something psychologically to pull the trigger.
Now, sustainability and legacy value, which we talked about a minute ago, behavior are obviously all important reasons to consider an annuity. But I think one of the most interesting concepts that I pulled from your book was that if you allocate to an annuity, to this guaranteed source of income, it can actually allow you to spend more of your overall capital. Can you talk about how that works?
It's analogous to what we just talked about a few minutes ago, that you can take more risk in the portfolio. So if you know that, if you say I've got $20,000 coming in between my OAS and my CPP, but I want to spend for sure to meet my minimum requirements, I want to spend 30. So I'm going to buy an annuity that will give me that $10,000. Then you can kind of free-for-all it with the rest. You can also create legacy value. I mean, I'm not here to promote or decry any particular solution, but you can create legacy value other ways. You could buy a life insurance policy, for example, if you wanted to be sure that legacy was there. So again, you can do lots of different things to boost how much you can take out of the portfolio. And one of the ways is I'm taking out the longevity risk. And the second way is, I know that I want to leave a financial legacy for my kids or for a charity or for something that I want. I'm going to buy life insurance to cover off that risk. Okay, now the rest of it is all available to spend.
So interesting. I think it was in a book by Wade Pfau that I read, I think. Might have been a paper, I can't remember. But it was, we talked about RSQ, the sustainability quotient, and the legacy value. And there was another concept that I think it was him that introduced, was the efficiency quotient or something like that, the spending efficiency, which is, I think, what we're talking about. It's a fascinating concept to think you can spend down a portfolio more efficiently by hedging against risks and planning for legacy values through different means.
See, that's our behavioral finance versus financial economics versus financial planning.
Yeah.
If you want to find efficient solutions, the market's got them for you. But then you run into all the conundrums about how these are sold, to whom they're sold, whether people know about them, what they think about them, the innate difficulty of writing these large checks to insurance companies. Do people trust the insurance company? And then another portion of it is the compensation initiatives or the compensation incentives for advisors in the annuity space are low. So if I have a client and they've got $1 million and they want to put it into an annuity, and I'm the one who sells it to them, I get paid once. And all things considered, the commission is relatively low versus I'm going to manage that money for them ongoingly. I'm going to get the same amount many times over. The client is then my annuity.
So fascinating.
And that is absolutely the issue. So you'd certainly want to have an advisor that is clear about that, and investors should be aware of that as they view their overall product allocation. So if someone does have sufficient capital to ensure that they will never run out of money, right? So 0% chance of ruin, I'm assuming you would still say that annuities make sense for the reason you were saying, because you can be more aggressive, or other reasons?
So if somebody has no chance of running out of money, so we're going to say that we've got somebody whose spending ratio is very low and they've got a defined benefit pension, for example. So if I've got a DB pension and I've got a portfolio and my DB pension plus my CPP plus my OAS more than exceed or meet my spending needs, they've got enough pensionization. There's no need for an annuity for that person.
What if we change that example a little bit and say that they have an RSQ of a sustainability quotient of 100, so they've got no chance of ruin, but they only have a portfolio. They don't have any pensionized assets, but they still have no chance of ruin.
their withdrawal rate would have to be very low, or their lifespan would be short too, right? So one of the problems with financial planning, as I said this earlier, is that people like these folklore rules. So for example, the 4% rule. So what's the safe withdrawal rate? Oh, is it 3.5? Is it 4%? Well, it's highly dependent on how old the person is and what's happening in the portfolio. So I have a portfolio that's worth $1 million. So I've got my 4% withdrawal rate, then 2008 happens. So all of a sudden, 4% is either of a different number, or what's happening with my 4% then? So the idea of this RSQ FLV horizon is that it's an array. You've got somebody with I feel like I've gone to this technical wasteland, but we've got somebody with an RSQ of 100%, so there's no chance they can run out of money. That can only happen if the income is somehow guaranteed, but you said that it's not. Therefore, it must be that their withdrawals relative to their portfolio are very low, or they're later in life. I like the RSQ FLV space because it gives me many more shades of gray than simplistic rules like you can always withdraw 4%.
So that leads me into the other thing that I have on my mind on this topic, which is, I just said that we were going to make the assumption that this person's never going to run out of money. And maybe they determined that using a Monte Carlo simulation to say, based on this big pool of capital and my low spending, my Monte Carlo result is 100%, therefore I don't need an annuity. Do you think that Monte Carlo is reliable enough to truly say your probability of ruin is 0?
Oh, so now you're going to get into the statisticians versus the mathematicians. So the question is with Monte Carlo is it's always a simulation. I mean, these things are all simulations, right? But how many times did you run that Monte Carlo? Did you run it 10,000 times? Did you run it 100,000 times? What is enough times? I mean, again, this isn't really a settled science. It would be great if we had a simple closed equation that we could use, but we don't. So we have to use simulations because we have to approximate. So if they've got I don't know what an adequate Monte Carlo is. I mean, how many simulations did you run? I want to run more than 100, probably fewer than 100,000. They're probably fine.
It's an interesting thing to think about, though, because the other thing with Monte Carlo is that even if you run 100,000 simulations, it's still 100% reliant on the inputs.
Absolutely.
Which makes me kind of think, unless the capital is, $100 million and they're spending $2,000 a month, there's probably still a role for guaranteed sources of income.
Well, I think that brings up the idea of you can really try and hone in on being very exact. Okay, I'm going to get the exact figure. I'm going to get the exact number. I'm going to do the exact right number of simulations. But maybe it's better to work or to be able to be led simply by intuition, right? I know that I want more guaranteed income than I've got. I don't need to define precisely how much. I need to figure out an amount I'm comfortable with. Maybe that's 35% of my portfolio. Maybe it's 50%. But maybe you don't need to do so many simulations, and we need to be able to use these. Like I just said, rules of thumb are no good, but we can still be sort of guided by intuition about what the client's preferences are.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, that's that distinction between financial economics and financial planning.
Speaking of preferences, let's assume someone is younger, let's say in their 40s, and they may have sold their business or won the lottery and they have a lot of money. Would there ever be an argument based on their preferences to consider annuities, or is it just too young, too much inflation risk?
It's too expensive. So we're talking about immediate annuities, which start to pay out immediately. It's obviously too young for them. They're not retired yet, presumably.
No, but they could be.
Well, they could be, but the expense will be high because the expected lifespan is still very high. But what they might want to do is put some deferred annuity income into the portfolio. So it isn't starting to pay when they're 40. Maybe it starts when they're 65. When you think about it, that's what your classic DB pension is. I'm going to pay a little bit today and over the course of my career in exchange for income that begins at a later date. And of course, with the 2019 budget, we are going to start to see these advanced life deferred annuities, which allow people to start taking income out at advanced ages like 85. So you have money in a portfolio. You're not ready to start worrying about, because the issue with longevity risk is, so at age of 65, your probability of survival to age of 66 is quite high, right? What you're worried about is those later years in life, 85, 90, 95, 100. So centenarians are the largest growing group of all cohorts in Canada. So we got people over 100 growing faster than anybody else. So you'll want to protect against that risk. But if I buy at 65 and I buy an immediate annuity, it's starting to pay me at 65. Maybe I just want to put, like I said, a long option on my portfolio that pays out only if I hit the age of 85 or 90 or 95.
Huh. So presumably, would it be a lot cheaper to buy it when you're younger?
Essentially, yes. It's essentially insurance on your portfolio.
Oh, that's fascinating.
But you don't have to start taking it now.
Yeah.
So it's in the same realm as any kind of futures contract, theoretically, right? That you're buying an option which will pay out if you hit the strike price or if you hit the strike age in this case.
Wow. Optionality of annuities. I did not think we were going to go there today. But it makes sense. Okay. So we're talking about guaranteeing streams of income. And that line of discussion just now was fast. I'm going to have to think more about that. But on that same topic of guaranteeing income, one of the things that we hear quite a bit is that, well, you can build a ladder of GICs to guarantee 5 years of income, and that'll hedge against market downturns and stuff like that. In the book, you basically annihilated that, which I thought was awesome. And I agree with you. Can you talk a little bit about why a GIC ladder is not really a guaranteed stream of income?
Well, it's one of those sort of superficially attractive. There's that famous quote that for every problem, there's a simple, elegant, wrong solution. So this could be an example of that. So the issue with the GIC ladder, and it is absolutely superficially appealing, is that you don't know when the bear market's coming in. So you say, okay, I'm going to build my 5-year ladder. Okay, so what if in year 5 you're deep into bear territory? You haven't done anything. You haven't solved anything. You've used up all that cash that you set aside, and there's a million different names for this. I'm sure you're aware of all of them, the cash wedge, everything. What you're talking about is an asset allocation problem. And if you need guaranteed income, or if you need income from a portfolio, just go and get an annuity.
I love it. I mean, if you spend down your GIC ladder in a bear market, the example you gave in the book was you end up with, like you said, year 5 of the bear market, your portfolio is 90% equities or whatever it is because you've spent down so much of your fixed income. And now what? Exactly. Exactly. It's basically a decision to tactically not rebalance into fixed income during a bear market.
That's right.
Let's get more aggressive in a bear market. Market timing, I guess.
Well, it goes back to that sort of first principles of what is it that you want from the portfolio. If what you want is income, then there's another way to do it, right? That to say that the GIC ladder will do it. And we could talk about the tax treatment of annuities. If you have non-reg money, and you want to buy an annuity, you're going to get a bigger yield from that annuity because a portion of it is taxed as return of capital, meaning, especially if you buy at advanced ages, the annuity may be providing essentially tax-free income.
That's crazy. This is, yeah.
And I've done some in the past where, the old back-to-back annuities where it was backed up by an insurance policy, as you mentioned. And those, especially when interest rates were higher, were fabulous. Do the comparison towards a GIC, there was no comparison at all. Yeah. And you had the insurance policy to back up the assets because you gave up the money for the annuity. And it still came out ahead, even after the insurance premium.
Can you talk more about that, either Alexandra or Cameron? Because I'm not that familiar with the back-to-back.
Cameron.
Well, so we've done a number of these, but it's been a number of years where you take someone's capital. Let's say you took $250,000, you went and bought an annuity. That created a cash flow for the person, and this typically done for well into their 70s. Then you take part of that cash flow and then go buy an insurance policy to replace it $250 should you pass away, so you've preserved the value of the estate. And when you did the math based on it being a prescribed annuity, and so little of the income was actually taxable, even after paying the insurance policy premium, the cash flow benefit came out ahead of buying GICs at the time.
Unreal.
Accurate,
and I think that's
Alexandra? Probably
still the case too now, because the tax treatment of the prescribed annuity makes it very attractive if you're buying the annuity at an advanced age. So the client says, well, I need stable, predictable income. What's the yield on a GIC now?
2.5%.
Yeah, so I can get 6%, presuming I'm buying my annuity at, let's say, age 70. And I'm getting almost nothing that's taken into taxable income. So I can also preserve those government benefits if that's another consideration. I'm preserving GIS, OAS.
Oh, wow. Yeah, right. Fascinating. Okay.
But you get the higher cash flow. Yeah, for sure.
Now, you already made reference to this, but I want to dig into it a little bit more. The advanced life deferred annuity, which is allowing people now to take money from their RSP and buy an annuity that doesn't have to start paying until age 85, which is a big deal because previously you had to turn into a RIF at age 71 and start taking money out at age 72. So this is an extra long deferral vehicle now. How significant do you think the introduction of this is?
Well, right now we don't have any products in the marketplace. So Finance just released the draft legislation last week, which will recognize this once the Income Tax Act is amended. And I have no special knowledge of who is going to enter the marketplace and how they might do so. Certainly, I would expect to start to see product offerings sometime next year. And I think, we talked earlier about who's the right candidate for an annuity. And so it's a subset of those people. It's people who say, I'm worried about potentially running out of money or seeing a decline in my standard of living at an advanced age. And here's a way that I can hedge against portfolio loss.
So when we spoke last week, Alexandra, in preparation for this interview, you mentioned you're doing a lot of copycat annuities. Thought that was so interesting. Can you describe what they are and kind of what the issue is that you're tackling?
Right. So this is kind of a tax story. And so think about, for example, GM announced that some of its plants are going to stop manufacturing. And a lot of people at GM have worked there for 35 years. They've had a DB pension the entire time. They don't typically have a lot of savings outside the DB pension. And so they're looking at, they can keep their pension with GM. They don't know whether GM's going to be around 30 years to still pay this thing to them or to their survivor. They can take the money out, but because of income tax rules, they might face taxation on maybe as much as half of the commuted value. So they're looking at a tax bill of $200,000 maybe on their commuted value. Or the Income Tax Act will allow them to take the money out and transfer it to an insurance company that will provide the same rights and benefits that the pension would have provided. So you would do that because you can first stay in a DB environment. So if you want to stay in that pensionized environment, I don't want to manage money, I don't want to have investment risk, I don't have any tolerance for this, and I don't have any experience doing it. I also don't want to pay $200,000 of tax, which is immediately going to friction off some of the amount that was going to be used to provide income. Then this is a way that people can still keep that pension, but have it be more secure because they're transferring it away from GM and potentially a not solvent plan to a well-capitalized insurance company that's also insured itself.
Now, it seems like this decision would be the same for someone who's leaving a DC plan, with the difference being you're going from knowing you have a lump sum to a guaranteed stream of income. In the case of the DC plan, do you think is it the same decision?
So let's think about that. So the DC plan by definition can all go into the LIRA. So there's no additional tax. The distinction is this thing called the MTV, or the maximum transfer value, with the DB plan. We have another whole conversation about the so-called rule of 9. There's rules in the Income Tax Act that govern how much you can take out that's tax sheltered and how much you have to take in it as taxable income. And those rules can be very brutal. If the plan entitlement is large, you might be facing a very large tax bill. So that's the difference between commuting out of a DC plan and commuting out of a DB plan.
Very interesting. Okay, we're doing well for time, and so I'm going to tack on one extra question. Now, you just wrote an article about it in Money Sense. It was on the CPP and how the lowest years work, and what is the impact if someone who is retired defers CPP, and where's that? There can be a case where you end up being worse off by deferring because you end up with more low years that can't be dropped off. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So there's a couple different ways. So when you are participating in CPP, you're always contributing at some fraction of the year's maximum pensionable income. So this year, the maximum pensionable income, so that's the amount on which CPP premiums are made, is $57,400. So if you're earning that amount or more, then you're making the maximum premiums. But you might have years when you're earning less relative to the maximum. In fact, some years when you're earning zero. So you hit age 60 when you first become eligible to take CPP, and you can go to the federal government's website and get your statement of contributions. And it will give you a total number of years that you've contributed, the total amount that you've contributed relative to the maximum for that year. And then there's different so-called dropout provisions that are applied. So if you, as a generic term, and for everybody, you can drop out up to 8 years of low income years. There are additional provisions if you were at home raising children. So if your income was low because you were primarily responsible for a child up to the age of 7, child or children. So you can drop out, there's the so-called general dropout provisions and the child rearing dropout provisions. So once you've dropped out all those months, then your CPP income or your retirement benefit is calculated on the months that remain. In the case that you're thinking of, I wrote an article on Money Sense that was published on Money Sense for a person who was age 60 and saying, if I stop working now and therefore stop contributing, but I don't take CPP until 65, how are those 5 years of low income going to count against me? In her case, because she had so many years of high income, she could drop out those 5 and it would have no impact on her benefit. But if you already have many years of low income leading up to age 60, then adding 5 more years of low income could reduce your benefit. But the CPP statement of contributions will give you the information, and if you couple it with the context from that article, you can kind of figure out what the next steps are.
So interesting, because people talk about taking CPP earlier versus later, and I've rarely heard the discussion including that dropout provision.
Dropout. CPP is very complex. There's a whole school of thought about how the Income Tax Act is too complicated and it's an access to justice issue for people. I think the CPP Act veers into that same territory. It is not easy to look at the CPP website and figure out, well, what should I do? I mean, you can get all of the information. What's missing is the explanation and the context.
Fascinating stuff.
Absolutely fascinating. If you could change one thing in the retirement system in Canada, do you have an idea of what it would be?
Wow, you didn't give me that question in the lead up. So I didn't get to think about it. I would love it if there was a way to buy into annuities privately over time. So what if I could buy into, so instead of making this one-time decision at age 60 or 65 or 70, what if I could buy units of deferred guaranteed income? And I think that that's probably coming at some point. We're just not there yet.
Like buy into your own pieces of a pension plan.
That's right. Buy it in little tranches, little slices.
So that's not available now? Like if I'm 40 and I start buying and I put money into a pension, I can do that only in a lump sum?
Well, you can do it. So I'm 51 now. So what if I wanted to buy income that would start at 65? I could go out there and buy a deferred annuity that would start at 65. And then next year I could buy a little more. It's not available as kind of a systematic thing. I would need to it's like your GIC letter. This would be this thing that I would be synthetically creating versus a product that would say, okay, age 50, let's put you in this target date fund that's going to then convert to annuity at age 65. So there's innovation in the US that we don't have here. I said target date funds, and that's a big one. We don't have the same range of retirement savings products that are available elsewhere in the world, and that's something I think hopefully will come.
And they also have longevity insurance, right, in the US?
You're probably talking about essentially the ALDAs that we're getting here.
Okay. Yeah, that's what it sounded like conceptually, but I think it's much more popular, right? I believe.
Well, it's a much bigger market. So there's a lot more innovation, right? There's a lot more horsepower thrown at solving these kinds of problems than we have here.
Your answer to what you would change in the Canadian retirement system, it was a great answer. I would put money into a product like that. Like if I could sort of top up CPP by dumping extra money into this DB plan, I'd be all over it. It's a good answer.
100% agree.
All right. I think that's all we have. Cameron, anything else?
No, it's been great to get to see you again, and thanks for such thoughtful, and you've given some great lines. I think the classic line you left us with was a folklore and rules of thumb in the financial planning industry.
I think that this is such an important topic, and it's not discussed enough, and you gave us and our listeners a ton of unique, interesting insight.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation.